Judge Marcus Wellington had presided over the county's criminal court for 15 years, earning a reputation for fairness, wisdom, and an unwavering commitment to justice. His decisions were cited in law journals, his courtroom was considered a model of judicial temperament, and younger judges sought his mentorship. But tonight, Judge Wellington wasn't wearing his black robes. He was just Marcus, dressed in faded jeans and a worn university sweatshirt, sitting in the waiting room of St. Mary's Hospital at 11 o'clock on a Friday night. His daughter Emma, a college sophomore, had called 2 hours earlier in tears. She'd been at a friend's apartment near campus when she'd fallen down the stairs, landing hard on her left ankle. Now Marcus sat beside her as they waited for X-ray results, his hand holding hers while she fought back tears of pain and embarrassment. "Mr. Wellington?" A young nurse appeared in the doorway. "We're moving Emma to examination room 7. The doctor will see her shortly." Marcus helped his daughter hobble down the hallway, her arm draped over his shoulders. They passed through the emergency department's controlled chaos. A teenager with a skateboarding injury, an elderly man clutching his chest, a mother comforting a feverish toddler. Room 7 was small and sterile, with that particular hospital smell of antiseptic and anxiety. Emma settled onto the examination table while Marcus took the chair beside her, preparing for what he knew would be a long wait. That's when he heard the voices in the next room, room 6, separated from them by only a thin curtain and a privacy wall that clearly wasn't soundproof. "Mr. Kovac, I've reviewed your test results." The voice was male, authoritative, professional. "Your blood alcohol level was 0.17, well over the legal limit. You also tested positive for cocaine. The accident that brought you here? You were driving under the influence, you ran a red light, and you T-boned another vehicle. The driver of that car, a 23-year-old woman, is in surgery right now with life-threatening injuries. Look, document." The responding voice was slurred but defiant. "I don't remember any accident, okay? I don't remember anything about tonight. How can they charge me with something I can't even remember?" Marcus felt his attention sharpen. As a judge, he'd heard every excuse, every attempt at evasion, but something about hearing it in this context, raw and unfiltered, made his skin crawl. "Whether you remember it or not doesn't change what happened," the doctor replied, his voice harder now. "The police have already been here. They're filing charges for DUI, vehicular assault, and potentially vehicular manslaughter if the victim doesn't survive. You're looking at serious prison time, Mr. Kovac." There was a long pause. Then Marcus heard a sound that made his blood run cold, the unmistakable rustle of money. "What if?" Kovac's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, but in the quiet hospital night, it carried clearly through the wall. "What if those test results got lost? What if the blood work showed I was clean? I've got $20,000 in cash at home. Document 20,000 for 5 minutes of work on a computer. Nobody gets hurt. Well, nobody else gets hurt, and you walk away with enough money to take your family on a real nice vacation." Marcus's hand tightened on Emma's. His daughter looked at him with wide eyes, clearly hearing the conversation too. He put a finger to his lips, then quietly pulled out his phone and activated the voice recorder, adjusting the volume to maximum sensitivity. The doctor's response came after a heavy pause. "Are you seriously trying to bribe me to falsify medical records and destroy evidence in a criminal case?" "I'm offering you a business proposition," Kovac said, and Marcus could hear the oily confidence in his voice now. "Look, I know how hospitals work. I know doctors like you don't get paid what you're worth. $20,000 cash, completely untraceable. All you do is delete some files, maybe say the samples got contaminated. Simple. Easy. Profitable." "I could lose my medical license," the doctor said, but Marcus detected something in his tone, not outright refusal, but consideration. The sound of someone calculating odds. "Only if anyone finds out," Kovac pressed. And who's going to tell them? Not me. That's for damn sure. Not you, because you'd be implicating yourself. The perfect crime document. Nobody knows, nobody talks, everybody wins. Another pause. Marcus felt sick to his stomach. He'd seen cases like this before, evidence mysteriously disappearing, test results getting lost, crucial documents vanishing from files. But he'd never heard the corruption happening in real time. The quiet hospital corridor is dimly lit, with the occasional flicker of fluorescent lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. How do I know you actually have $20,000? The doctor asked quietly. Marcus's heart sank. The doctor was negotiating. My lawyer's bringing it tomorrow morning, Kovac said eagerly, sensing victory. You make the evidence disappear tonight. The cash is yours by noon. We can meet anywhere you want, parking garage, coffee shop, wherever. Completely discreet. I need to think about this, the doctor said. What's to think about? You want to be a hero, saving lives for 60 hours a week while you drown in student loans? Or you want to be smart, make the system work for you for once? I'm offering you a way out. Document, don't be stupid. Marcus heard footsteps, then the sound of a door opening and closing. The doctor had left. A moment later, he heard Kovac on his phone. Yeah, it's me, Kovac said, his voice cocky now. The doc's thinking about it, but he'll bite. They always do. Just have the cash ready. No, I'm serious about this. If I go down for this DUI, I lose everything, my license, my business, probably my marriage. 20 grand is cheap. Compared to what I'm facing. The girl? Who cares about the girl? She'll probably die anyway, and then none of this matters because they can't prove I was even there if there's no blood work. Just get the money. Emma was staring at her father with an expression of horror and disbelief. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, not the hot, impulsive kind, but the cold, calculated fury of someone who devoted his life to justice and was watching it be casually dismantled for cash. He continued recording, capturing every word. 20 minutes later, the doctor returned to Kovac's room. Marcus heard the door close, then the doctor's voice, lower now, harder to hear. He moved closer to the wall, his phone extended. I've thought about your offer, the doctor said. And Kovac's eagerness was palpable. And I think you should know something, the doctor continued, his voice suddenly stronger, clearer. Everything you just said to me was recorded by the hospital's security system. This examination room has audio monitoring for patient safety and legal protection. Every word of your bribe attempt, your confession to drunk driving, your callous disregard for your victim, all of it is documented. What? Kovac's voice rose in panic. You can't. That's illegal. You can't record me without permission. Actually, under state law, hospitals can record patient interactions in examination rooms with proper signage, which is posted outside every room in the ER. You just didn't bother to read it. You son of a... Furthermore, the doctor continued coldly, I'm a mandatory reporter for criminal activity. I'm legally required to report your bribe attempt to law enforcement. The police are already here investigating the accident. I suspect they'll be very interested in this recording. Marcus heard the sounds of a scuffle, then Kovac shouting, You set me up? This is entrapment. No, Mr. Kovac. This is consequence. Something you've apparently avoided for too long. The door opened, and Marcus heard multiple voices, police officers, by the sound of it. He continued recording, capturing the sounds of Kovac's arrest, his protests, his threats. Emma squeezed her father's hand. Dad, she whispered, should we tell them what we heard too? Marcus looked at his daughter, pride mixing with his anger. Yes, he said quietly. Yes, we should. He stopped the recording and saved it, then stepped out of the examination room. The hallway was controlled chaos. Officers taking statements, the doctor explaining what had happened, Kovac being read his Miranda rights while he shouted obscenities. Marcus approached the senior officer, a grizzled sergeant named Patterson whom he recognized from court proceedings. "Sergeant Patterson," Marcus said quietly. The officer turned, his eyes widening slightly. "Judge Wellington, what are you doing here?" "My daughter had an accident. She's fine, just waiting for x-rays. But I need to speak with you about what just happened in room 6. My daughter and I overheard everything from room 7. I recorded the entire conversation, including Mr. Kovac's bribe attempt and his confession to drunk driving." Patterson's expression shifted from surprise to intense focus. "You recorded it?" "I did." Marcus handed over his phone. "Everything from the moment Kovac offered the bribe through his arrest. It corroborates everything the doctor is telling you, and it includes additional statements Kovac made during a phone call where he discussed the victim's condition with callous disregard and confirmed his intention to bribe the doctor. The doctor, his name tag read Dr. James Morrison, approached them. "Judge Wellington, I didn't realize you were in the next room." "Dr. Morrison," Marcus nodded with respect, "I want to commend you for your integrity. In my years on the bench, I've seen too many cases fall apart because evidence disappeared or witnesses refused to cooperate. What you did tonight, refusing a substantial bribe and reporting criminal activity, that takes real courage." Morrison looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I was just doing my job, Your Honor. I took an oath to do no harm. Falsifying evidence to help a drunk driver escape justice while his victim fights for her life? That violates everything I believe in." "Many people would have rationalized it differently," Marcus said. "They would have convinced themselves that the money could do good, that the system is unfair anyway, that one case doesn't matter. The fact that you didn't rationalize, that you chose integrity over profit, that matters. That matters enormously." Patterson was already on his radio, calling for additional units and contacting the district attorney's office. He looked at Marcus. "Judge, I'll need you and your daughter to provide formal statements." "Of course. We'll cooperate fully." Emma had emerged from the examination room, leaning on crutches a nurse had provided. "Dad, is everything okay?" Marcus put his arm around her shoulders. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. We're just helping make sure justice is served." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Emma's x-rays showed a severe sprain but no fracture, and she was fitted with a walking boot and given pain medication. While she rested, Marcus provided a detailed statement to the police, surrendered his phone recording as evidence, and agreed to testify if the case went to trial. He also learned more about the victim, Kimberly Torres, a recent college graduate who'd been driving home from her job as a paralegal when Kovac's BMW had slammed into her driver's side at over 60 miles per hour. She had a fractured pelvis, internal bleeding, and a traumatic brain injury. Doctors gave her a 30% chance of survival. And the man responsible had tried to bribe his way out of accountability. By the time Marcus and Emma left the hospital at 4 in the morning, he knew this case would end up in his courtroom. The county wasn't large, and DUI cases of this magnitude were always assigned to the most experienced judge. In less than 48 hours, Kovac would appear before him for arraignment, and Marcus would have to recuse himself as both a witness and because he'd heard privileged medical information. But that didn't mean he couldn't ensure the case was handled properly. Saturday morning, despite having slept only 3 hours, Marcus called Judge Diana Chen, his colleague and friend who'd been on the bench for 12 years. "Diana, it's Marcus. I need to talk to you about a case that's going to land on someone's docket Monday morning, State versus Alexander Kovac." "The DUI vehicular assault from last night?" Diana's voice was alert despite the early hour. "I heard about it. The victim's in critical condition. Why are you calling me about it?" Marcus explained the situation, being in the adjacent examination room, overhearing the bribe attempt, recording the conversation, becoming a witness. He laid out every detail with the precision of someone who understood exactly how important accurate information would be. Diana listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. Marcus, you know this puts you in a complicated position. You're a witness in a case that will likely come before this court. You've heard information that could bias any judge hearing it. You're going to face scrutiny, maybe even accusations of impropriety. I know, Marcus said quietly. But I also know that if I'd stayed silent, if I'd pretended I didn't hear what I heard, I'd be complicit in obstructing justice. I took an oath, Diana, to uphold the law, to ensure justice is served. That oath doesn't come with an "except when it's inconvenient" clause. No, it doesn't, Diana agreed. All right. I'll request the case be assigned to me. I'll handle it personally. And Marcus? What you did, recording that conversation, coming forward despite knowing the complications it would create for you professionally, that's the kind of integrity this system desperately needs. I just did what any judge should do, Marcus protested. No, you did what any judge should do, but many wouldn't, Diana corrected. There's a difference, and we both know it. The arraignment on Monday morning was standing room only. News of the case had spread through the legal community like wildfire. A prominent businessman attempting to bribe a doctor, overheard and recorded by a sitting judge. The media was having a field day with the judge as witness angle. Alexander Kovac stood before Judge Chin, his expensive suit and slicked-back hair giving him an air of confidence that seemed wildly inappropriate given the circumstances. His attorney, Martin Blackwood, known for getting wealthy clients reduced charges, stood beside him with a bearing of someone who believed himself untouchable. Marcus sat in the gallery, present as a witness, watching the man who'd so casually tried to buy his way out of justice. Judge Chin read the charges with clinical precision. Mr. Kovac, you're charged with driving under the influence, vehicular assault, cocaine possession, bribery of a medical professional, tampering with evidence, and obstruction of justice. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor, Blackwood answered for his client. Furthermore, we move to dismiss the bribery and obstruction charges on the grounds that my client's conversation with Dr. Morrison was protected by doctor-patient confidentiality, and any recording of that conversation without explicit consent violates state privacy laws. Denied, Judge Chin said without hesitation. Doctor-patient privilege doesn't extend to criminal activity or attempts to corrupt a medical professional. The hospital's recording policy is clearly posted and complies with state law. The charges stand. Bail is set at $500,000. Mr. Kovac will surrender his passport, wear an ankle monitor, and maintain a 50-mile travel restriction pending trial. Next court date is set for preliminary hearing in 14 days. Your Honor, Blackwood protested, a $500,000 bail is excessive for a first-time offender. Mr. Kovac has demonstrated a willingness to use his financial resources to obstruct justice, Judge Chin interrupted coldly. He attempted to bribe a medical professional with $20,000 in cash. He poses a flight risk. Bail stands. We're adjourned. Marcus watched Kovac's face cycle through emotions, shock, outrage, and finally, fear. This was a man accustomed to buying his way out of problems, suddenly discovering that money had limits. The weeks that followed were intense. Marcus testified before the grand jury, which returned indictments on all charges. The district attorney, buoyed by the strength of the evidence, rejected multiple plea offers from Blackwood. Meanwhile, Kimberly Torres clung to life in the ICU, undergoing multiple surgeries as doctors fought to save her. Marcus found himself at the center of a media storm. Legal ethics experts debated whether a judge should have become involved, whether his recording was appropriate, whether his future rulings would be tainted by the experience. The State Judicial Commission opened an inquiry into his conduct. But Marcus also received support from unexpected quarters. Dr. Morrison wrote an editorial for the city newspaper praising Marcus's courage and calling for more accountability in the justice system. Kimberly Torres's family released a statement thanking Marcus for ensuring their daughter's case wouldn't be swept under the rug. And dozens of judges from across the state sent private messages of support, acknowledging that Marcus had done what many of them hoped they'd have the courage to do in similar circumstances. 3 months after that night in the hospital, the trial began. Judge Chun presided with meticulous fairness, allowing both sides to present their cases fully. But the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution presented Marcus's recording, which captured Kovac's bribe attempt in his own words. They presented Dr. Morrison's testimony, steady and unshakable. They presented the hospital security recording, which corroborated everything. They presented the blood alcohol and toxicology results that Kovac had wanted destroyed. They presented accident reconstruction experts who demonstrated Kovac's BMW had been traveling at nearly 70 miles per hour when it ran the red light. They presented Kimberly Torres herself, wheelchair-bound and still recovering, who testified about the permanent injuries she'd sustained and the life she'd lost. Blackwood fought valiantly, arguing that Kovac had been too intoxicated to form criminal intent, that his bribe attempt was the desperate act of a confused, injured man who didn't understand the implications of his words. But the recording Marcus had made destroyed that defense. Kovac's voice was too clear, too calculated, too aware of exactly what he was doing. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the gallery once again as Judge Chin delivered Kovac's sentence. The courtroom was packed with supporters of Kimberly Torres, with members of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, with people who'd lost loved ones to impaired drivers. Mr. Kovac, Judge Chin began, her voice carrying the weight of judgment, you made a series of choices on the night of March 15th. You chose to use cocaine. You chose to drink heavily. You chose to get behind the wheel of a 2-ton vehicle. And when your reckless choices nearly killed an innocent young woman, you chose to try to escape accountability by corrupting a medical professional and destroying evidence. She paused, letting the words settle over the courtroom. Each of those choices demonstrated a profound disregard for human life and for the rule of law. You believed your wealth and status placed you above consequences. You were wrong. Judge Chin looked down at the sentencing guidelines before her, then back at Kovac. For DUI vehicular assault, 15 years. For bribery and obstruction of justice, 5 years consecutive. For cocaine possession, 2 years concurrent. Total sentence, 20 years in state prison, with parole eligibility after 15. Additionally, upon release, you'll serve 5 years of supervised probation, perform 1,000 hours of community service with victims' advocacy groups, and pay full restitution to Ms. Torres for her medical expenses and lost wages. Kovac's face crumbled. His attorney put a steadying hand on his shoulder, but the man was clearly destroyed. 20 years. He'd be nearly 60 when he got out, assuming he made parole. As the guards led Kovac away, Marcus caught sight of Kimberly Torres. She was crying, but they were tears of relief. Her mother held her hand, and her father had his arm around them both. Justice hadn't healed Kimberly's injuries, hadn't restored what she'd lost, but it had acknowledged her suffering, had validated that what happened to her mattered. After the courtroom cleared, Judge Chin approached Marcus in the hallway. The Judicial Commission closed their inquiry into your conduct, she said. Full exoneration. They concluded that you acted appropriately given the circumstances, that you had no obligation to ignore criminal activity, and that your recording was legal and necessary. You're clear, Marcus. Marcus nodded, relieved but not surprised. He'd known he'd done the right thing, but official vindication still mattered. Thank you, Diana. for handling this case, for your fairness, for everything." "I should be thanking you," Diana replied. "You reminded all of us why we became judges in the first place. Not for the prestige or the salary or the title, but because justice matters. Because when we see wrong, we have an obligation to stand against it, regardless of the personal cost." Marcus thought about that as he drove home that evening. He'd become a judge because he believed in the law, in the idea that a society governed by impartial rules was better than one governed by power and money. But he'd also learned that belief wasn't enough. Integrity required action, especially when action was difficult or costly. 6 months after Kovac's sentencing, Marcus received an invitation to speak at the state's annual judicial conference. The topic: Ethics in Action, a judge's duty beyond the bench. Standing before 200 of his peers, Marcus told the story of that night in the hospital. He talked about the moment he'd overheard the bribe attempt, the decision to record it, the complications that followed. He talked about the professional scrutiny, the media attention, the investigation into his conduct. But mostly he talked about Kimberly Torres. "I think about her often," Marcus said. "This young woman who was just driving home from work, who did everything right, whose life was nearly destroyed by someone else's selfish choices. I think about how close Alexander Kovac came to escaping accountability for what he did to her. $20,000, that's what he thought justice was worth. $20,000, and Kimberly Torres would have been just another statistic, another victim whose case fell apart because evidence mysteriously disappeared." He paused, looking around the room at faces he'd known for years, some supportive, some skeptical, all listening. "We're judges. We hold immense power in our society. People appear before us at the most vulnerable moments of their lives, when they're accused of crimes, when they're seeking justice for wrongs done to them, when they're fighting for their children or their freedom or their dignity. And they trust that we'll be fair, that we'll follow the law, that we won't look the other way when it's convenient." That night in the hospital, I wasn't wearing my robes. I wasn't sitting on the bench. I was just a father helping his injured daughter. I could have ignored what I heard. I could have told myself it wasn't my problem, that I was off duty, that someone else would handle it. But if I had done that, what would it say about my commitment to justice? How could I sit in judgment of others if I wasn't willing to act when I witnessed criminal behavior myself? He looked at a young judge in the front row, someone who'd been appointed just 6 months earlier. Integrity isn't situational. It doesn't turn on and off depending on whether we're wearing our robes. We're judges every hour of every day, and that means we have a higher standard to uphold. Not entrusted us with enormous responsibility because we're better than other people, but because the public has. When we see justice being undermined, we have an obligation to act, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it creates complications, even when it costs us personally. The room was silent. Marcus could see some judges nodding, others looking thoughtful, a few looking uncomfortable. $20,000, that's what he thought justice was worth. $20,000, and Kimberly Torres would have been just another statistic. "What I did wasn't heroic," Marcus concluded. "It was simply what any judge should do when confronted with criminal activity. I recorded evidence of a crime, I reported it to law enforcement, and I testified truthfully about what I witnessed. That's not heroism. That's baseline integrity. And if we can't meet that standard, if we're not willing to act when justice is threatened right in front of us, then we have no business wearing these robes." The applause started slowly, then built. Not everyone was clapping. Some judges sat with arms crossed, clearly uncomfortable with Marcus's message. But enough were applauding that Marcus felt a spark of hope. Change was possible. Accountability was possible. Justice was possible if enough people had the courage to fight for it. Judge Wellington, She smiled when she opened the door, maneuvering her wheelchair with practiced ease. "This is a surprise. Come in, please." Her apartment was small but bright, filled with photos of friends and family, artwork on the walls, a sense of life persisting despite tragedy. "I wanted to check on you," Marcus said, taking a seat on her couch. "See how you're doing, how the recovery's going." "Better," Kimberly said. "Some days are harder than others, but I'm working with a counselor, doing my PT, trying to build a new normal. The settlement money from Kovacs Insurance is helping. I can afford the adaptive equipment I need. The medical bills aren't crushing me. It's not the life I planned, but it's a life. I'm grateful for that." "I'm glad," Marcus said sincerely. Kimberly rolled closer, her expression serious. "Judge Wellington, I need to thank you. Not just for what you did that night, recording Kovac, reporting him, testifying against him. I need to thank you for caring. You didn't have to get involved. You could have ignored what you heard, told yourself it wasn't your problem. But you didn't. You stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. You made sure that what happened to me mattered, that Kovac didn't get to buy his way out of accountability." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Kimberly, anyone in my position should have done the same thing. But they didn't," she said simply. "You did. And that made all the difference." They talked for another hour, about her dreams of going back to school, about her work with a victims advocacy group, about her determination not to let Kovac's actions define her entire life. By the time Marcus left, he felt something he hadn't felt in months: hope, not just for the legal system, but for the resilience of the human spirit. Driving home, Marcus thought about the journey that had started with a simple taxi ride to the hospital. He'd gone there as a father helping his injured daughter. He'd left as a witness to corruption, a participant in justice, and ultimately, as someone who'd been forced to examine his own commitment to the principles he'd spent his career upholding. The publicity had faded. The investigation had concluded. Life had returned to something resembling normal. But Marcus was changed by the experience. He was more vigilant now, more aware of how easily justice could be undermined, how corruption often flourished in small moments when people looked the other way. He was more committed to transparency, to accountability, to ensuring his courtroom remained a place where wealth and status didn't determine outcomes. And he was more grateful for people like Dr. Morrison, who'd refused a substantial bribe and chosen integrity over profit. More grateful for officers like Sergeant Patterson, who'd taken the case seriously and built an airtight prosecution. More grateful for judges like Diana Chin, who'd handled a complicated case with wisdom and fairness. Justice wasn't just about laws and procedures. It was about people, people who chose to do the right thing even when it was difficult, even when it cost them, even when nobody was watching. Several months later, Marcus was approached by the State Bar Association to serve on a new ethics committee focused on judicial conduct and accountability. He accepted immediately. The committee's mission was to develop better guidelines for judges who witnessed criminal activity outside their courtrooms, to clarify their reporting obligations, and to protect judges who came forward from professional retaliation. It was work that mattered, work that could prevent future corruption, work that could strengthen public trust in the judicial system. During one committee meeting, a fellow judge asked Marcus a question that had been bothering several members. "Do you ever regret getting involved? Do you wish you'd just ignored what you heard that night?" Marcus considered the question carefully. His involvement had created complications, had subjected him to scrutiny, had consumed countless hours of his time. It would have been easier to look the other way. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret it. Because every time I put on my robes, every time I take the bench, every time I tell a witness to raise their right hand and swear to tell the truth, I'm asking people to have faith in this system. I'm asking them to believe that justice is real, that courts matter, that the law applies equally to everyone." How can I ask that of others if I'm not willing to live it myself? How can I demand honesty from witnesses if I'm willing to ignore criminal activity when it's convenient? Integrity isn't just a principle we apply in the courtroom. It's a way of life. And if we lose that, we lose everything that makes this system worth preserving. The room was quiet. Then, one by one, his colleagues nodded. They understood. Because they, too, had taken an oath. They, too, had pledged to uphold justice. And they, too, knew that sometimes upholding justice meant stepping outside the comfortable confines of the courtroom and acting in the messy, complicated real world where right and wrong weren't always clear, but courage was always necessary. As Marcus drove home that evening, he thought about the chain of events that had started with Emma's sprained ankle. He thought about the random chance of being in the right place at the right time, or perhaps the wrong place at the right time. He thought about the convergence of circumstances that had put him in that hospital room where he could hear justice being bargained away for cash. Some people would call it coincidence. Others might call it fate. Marcus just called it responsibility. Because in the end, that's what integrity really meant. Not just doing the right thing when it was easy or convenient or expected, but doing it especially when it was hard, when it was costly, when nobody would know if you looked away. The fight for justice was never finished. There would always be people like Alexander Kovac who believed money could buy immunity from consequence. There would always be temptations to look the other way, to rationalize inaction, to prioritize convenience over principle. But there would also always be people like Dr. Morrison, Sergeant Patterson, Judge Chen, and countless others who chose integrity over expedience. And as long as there were enough of those people, people willing to stand up, speak out, and act when justice was threatened, there was hope. Marcus Wellington had spent 15 years on the bench, presiding over thousands of cases, rendering countless decisions. But he knew that his most important act as a judge hadn't happened in a courtroom. It had happened in a hospital room, in the middle of the night, when he'd heard corruption in real time and decided that silence wasn't an option. That decision had cost him sleep, time, and professional scrutiny. But it had resulted in justice for Kimberly Torres, accountability for Alexander Kovac, and a reminder to every judge in the state that their oath extended beyond the courtroom walls. Sometimes, justice started with the smallest acts, a decision to record a conversation, a refusal to look away, a determination to do the right thing regardless of the cost.